This is a DMT and Blue Lotus trip report by Elrod, posted to Aroa.org on August 19, 2010. I want to start by saying that I have read many experience reports about DMT, and I have always felt that most of them are far too short to capture what really happens. The feeling is like trying to describe the most perfect taste you have ever known. You can point to other foods, you can use adjectives, but the true essence stays out of language. I do not think anyone is lying. I think the drug simply moves you into a place where words are too small. With that warning, I will try to write a longer, more detailed account of what happened to me on that night. My body weight at the time was about 290 pounds. My friend had brought a small amount of DMT that had been extracted from Mimosa tenuiflora by a mutual acquaintance. The material was a light brown powder with a crystalline sheen. It still contained some plant oils, which is normal for a crude extract. The dose he gave me was 50 micrograms per hit, and I planned to take 3 hits. He also had a small amount of Blue Lotus, probably about a gram, which he used as a screen to help the DMT vaporize more smoothly. We set up in my living room. The couch was positioned so that my wife could sit close to me. She wrapped her arm around my shoulder and rested her head on my chest. I felt a little nervous, but also curious. My friend loaded a glass pipe that had a thumbhole shotgun on the side. First, he placed a thin layer of Blue Lotus at the bottom of the bowl. Then he sprinkled the DMT on top of that. And finally, he covered the DMT with another thin layer of Lotus. The pipe looked ordinary, but the mixture inside gave it a faint amber glow when the flame touched it. I lit the pipe with a Bic lighter, holding the flame just long enough for the material to start vaporizing. A thin cloud of smoke rose, and I inhaled deeply. The first draw tasted of plastic and something sweet. Not unpleasant, but certainly not smooth. As soon as I exhaled, I saw tiny sparkles flicker in the room, like dust motes caught in a shaft of sunlight. My friend told me to breathe out, which I did, and then to take another hit. The second draw was a little easier to tolerate. The taste softened and the edges of the room began to blur. I felt the edges of objects soften as if they were made of wax. I remembered reading that the third hit is often the key to breaking through, so I prepared for the final inhalation. When I took the third hit, the world changed dramatically. A low thrum seemed to rise from the air itself. I looked at my friend, and around him I saw a series of concentric ripples, like the surface of a pond after a stone is dropped. The ripples moved outward, carrying his outline with them, as if his presence was a stone creating waves in a visible medium. My wife's hand stayed on my shoulder, but her presence began to feel more distant, as if she were a figure in a painting rather than a person next to me. My eyes closed on their own, without any effort on my part. When they closed, the room exploded into light, but not a frightening light. Bright geometric lines shot out from everywhere, forming patterns that reminded me of the kind of symbols you see on a computer screen when it is loading, but they were not any symbols I recognized. The lines moved in perfect rhythm, intersecting and branching, creating a vast lattice that seemed to stretch beyond any wall I could imagine. I felt as if my body had left the couch. There was no fear in this feeling, only a sense of release. The lines continued to flow, and after a few moments they began to gather together, coalescing into a shape that looked like a woman's head wrapped in a shawl. The figure was not a realistic portrait. It was made of the same luminous lines, but the outline was clear enough that I could tell it was a face. She smiled gently and turned to the left, as if inviting me to move in that direction. I moved toward her, and the sense of a physical body fell away completely. I was surrounded by light that pulsed and shifted colors faster than my eyes could track. It was not a simple white light like one might see in a near-death experience. It was a complex, moving tapestry of many hues, each hue blending into the next. The light seemed to be made of smaller pieces of light moving against each other, creating a sense of depth that was both enormous and intimate. I felt small, not in a scared way, but in a way that made me think I could see both the very large and the very tiny at the same time. It was as if I were looking at the machinery behind reality itself, the gears that turn and keep everything in motion. During this flight, I became aware that I could not hear my own heartbeat or the soft sound of my breathing. That lack of internal feedback made me uneasy for a moment. My blood pressure is a little high, and I have heard that DMT can affect the heart. I placed a hand on my chest, but I felt nothing. Then my wife squeezed my hand. Her touch was solid and warm, and it reminded me that I was still safe. That simple contact allowed me to relax again and continue the journey. The space I was moving through was full of information. Patterns of light flickered in a way that reminded me of a computer screen displaying endless streams of data. I felt that this was the underlying structure of everything, the hidden code that makes the world work. I drifted forward and soon saw a square room made of light. The walls were not flat. They seemed to unfold outward in more than 3 dimensions, like a tesseract opening up. Symbols floated on the walls, glowing bright, and they reminded me of the green code from the movie The Matrix, but they were not frightening. They simply were, showing me that there are many more dimensions than the 3 I live in. I entered the room without hesitation. Inside, the walls continued to expand, showing me layers of space that I could not name. I realized, for a brief moment, that reality is far more complex than my senses can capture. The feeling was both awe-inspiring and comforting. I spent a short time looking around, then I decided to leave. The transition back to the corridor was smooth, and I soon found myself in another scene. Now I was suspended in a calm void, looking at 2 giant cones of light that rotated in opposite directions. The cones were made of the same bright, information-rich material I had seen before, and they stretched far upward and far downward, far beyond what my eyes could follow. I was positioned slightly off-center so I could see the whole structure while also feeling that I was part of it. The cones turned slowly, and the motion gave me a feeling of happiness, as if I were watching a well-made machine work perfectly. I stayed there for what felt like a long time, but when I opened my eyes again, only a few minutes had passed. A quiet voice inside my mind told me that it was time to return. I let the cones recede, and the bright lines faded. My eyes opened to the living room, to the couch, to the dim light from the lamp. The moment I opened my eyes was the most striking part of the whole experience. I could shift my focus between the ordinary view of the room and a thin veil of the other side that lingered just beyond it. When I looked at my wife, I could see her face turn into crystal for an instant, and stars seemed to explode in her eyes. When I shifted my vision back, she was simply my wife, smiling and holding me. My friend, who had been sitting on the other couch, now appeared to wear a crystalline headdress like a shaman. He seemed to be the guide who had brought me into this place. His voice did not come through his mouth. It came directly into my head, sounding exactly like my own voice. The words were his, but they were delivered as if I were hearing my own thoughts. My wife also spoke to me in the same way, her voice filling the space and gently pulling me back into my body. When the experience ended, my dog began to bark. The bark formed a low bass line that matched a song that had been playing in my mind during the trip. I laughed, a light, almost childlike laugh, and the room felt warm. My friend later told me that only about 5 minutes had passed and that I had been calm the whole time. He reminded me that if I do not talk about it, the memory will fade. That is true. The details I have written here are what I can still hold on to. After I returned to normal consciousness, I felt no hangover, no lingering anxiety. My heart was beating normally, and I could breathe without difficulty. I sat for a few minutes, still feeling a faint afterglow, and then we began to discuss what had happened. I tried to put the images into words. I told my friend that it felt like I had glimpsed the quantum foam, the underlying fabric that makes everything work. It did not scare me. It felt like seeing the gears of a clock from the inside. I realized that I had been able to move between the ordinary world and a deeper layer of existence at will, and that realization stayed with me long after the trip. In summary, the dose was DMT 50 micrograms per hit, 3 hits, combined with about a gram of Blue Lotus. The whole journey lasted roughly 7 minutes, though it felt both brief and endless. I experienced bright geometric patterns, a luminous feminine figure, a multidimensional waiting room, rotating cones of information, and a sense of being able to switch my perception between the normal world and a hidden layer of reality. I felt fear for a moment when I could not feel my heartbeat, but my wife's touch reassured me. I returned with no physical after effects, only a deep sense of wonder about how much more there might be beyond what we normally see. I hope this longer account gives a clearer picture of what it is like to be inside DMT. The experience is difficult to capture in words, but I have tried to keep the description as direct as possible, focusing on the concrete sensations, the visual details, and the emotional shifts. It is a memory I will keep returning to, and it has changed the way I think about the world and the hidden layers that may exist underneath it.